so many injuries at every position in fantasy football that in reality, in week 9, the kicker position is kind of the only position that we can really rely on a weekly basis at this point. So we're going through the top 12 kickers for week 9. Just make sure to go down there and drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm the only fantasy YouTuber who does kicker rankings on a consistent basis every single week. Going down to our first tier right here, Austin Seibert back up at number 1. I know a lot of people are going to have some stuff to say about this because Austin Seibert was left out of my top 12 last week. Listen, I probably should have communicated this better. That was under the assumption that Jaden Daniels was not going to play. Obviously, with Jaden Daniels, he is going to be a top-tier kicker. And even last week, he was fantastic once again. That dude only kicked field goals up until the Hail Mary, basically, for the Commanders here. This dude has been lights out. 13.9 fantasy points per game, and he's missed 2 field goals, but he's hit a 55-yard long. Now, this week, the Washington Commanders, they're taking on the Giants, so it's an in-division game against a tougher defense like the Bears are. Not quite as tough. Obviously, I'm not saying the Giants are the 85 Bears or even the 2024 Bears, but I am saying that the Giants defense, they're feisty. They will get after the quarterback, and they will shut people down and make field goals force. So that just puts Austin Seibert in even more favorable light for another week straight. And now that I know Jaden Daniels is going, Austin Seibert back up where he belongs. Number 2, Ka'imi Fairbairn of the Houston Texans at the New York Jets this week. Listen, with Ka'imi Fairbairn, this dude has just been nothing short of really great, really consistently. This guy has only had 2 games where he's produced less than 10 fantasy points. This guy's been outrageous. He's, again, only missed 2 field goals. And reality being, this Texans offense is so set up for a kicker. Because especially without Nico Collins, they're capitalizing less on big plays. So they're getting down there a lot of times and just stalling on drives, giving Ka'imi Fairbairn field goal opportunities. And the guy we know has the long leg, 59-yard long kick this year. So 11.9 fantasy points per game. It's very sustainable. Tonight, taking on the Jets here in New York, I love the matchup because especially without Diggs and Nico, that offense is talented enough to get down there because of Mixon, but they're not always going to capitalize here. So Ka'imi Fairbairn, another week of me liking him a lot. Younghoe Koo to round out the tier at number 3 versus the Cowboys here. Obviously with Younghoe Koo, it's been a little bit disappointing over the past several weeks here. Younghoe Koo, in reality though, still averaging 9.9 fantasy points per game. Now the big concern that I've had with Younghoe Koo, I've had this for years now. This guy does miss kicks. He's missed 4 field goals this year, but he's hit a 58-yard long, and he is a streakier player, so sometimes he'll get on those rolls where he kind of misses a bunch of kicks. I think that this Cowboys matchup, it doesn't get a lot better because the Cowboys, they just suck. I mean, they really, really do suck. So every team could go down there. Every offense could go down there by running the ball, by throwing the ball. They'll get them in position. And the Falcons, whether they kick a couple field goals or they just get 5 touchdowns and maybe a field goal opportunity, I think those are all in the cards this week. Brandon Aubrey to start out the new tier. At number 4, at the Atlanta Falcons this week. Again, same matchup here. I said this last week, and I didn't get a ton of pushback for it, and I'm kind of glad because it's kind of right. With Brandon Aubrey, we're just in a position right now where this Cowboys team sucks. They're a disgrace. I mean, they really, truly are. So, unfortunately, kickers are kind of dependent, 100%, not kind of dependent, on how good their offense is. With Brandon Aubrey, this offense is just not moving the ball consistently. They're streaky, quarter to quarter, and a lot of times their production comes late in the game. So unless Brandon Aubrey can get down there because this offense can move the ball against the Falcons defense, which isn't particularly great, then I don't think that Brandon Aubrey could be a top-tier kicker this week. He's still very good. The guy's always going to hit what he's given, but Brandon Aubrey is just in a position where I think this offense is just not as good as they were last year, giving him fewer opportunities on a per-game basis. Number 5, Blake Group of the New Orleans Saints. Back here at number 5 because he's taking on the Carolina Panthers and he's getting Derek Carr back. That's a massive thing, obviously. I mean, listen, I'm no Derek Carr fan. I think he's definitely past his prime. He doesn't look very good. But he showed his worth by not playing because Spencer Rattler played, and that guy is a train wreck. I mean, he is a horrific NFL quarterback. He sucks. So Derek Carr being back is big for him. And if you look back, Blake Group's best game was against the Carolina Panthers because they crushed them in that game. 22 fantasy points is what he got that first week versus the Carolina Panthers. I'm seeing it. Maybe not that type of week again, but I definitely see a big game for Blake Group because this offense is not very good. So they're going to get down there in a lot of positions to where they can kick the field goal and then they'll stall out. That's what they'll do this week, so I like Blake Group a lot. And Justin Tucker to round the tier out at 6 versus the Denver Broncos here. I think with Justin Tucker, listen, the matchup versus Denver, this is going to be a lot tighter of a game than people think, I think. I think that Denver's defense is so good that this offense will stall out a bunch. And Justin Tucker has really rebounded his fantasy upside over the past month and a half or so. This guy has been doing really well in fantasy football, particularly over the past month or so. And I think that obviously with Justin Tucker, he's not the same player. He doesn't have that level of 60-yard range that he once did. But Justin Tucker still is very consistent for the most part, aside from 4 misses this year in field goals. I still rely on Justin Tucker a lot. And I do think that this matchup, again, it's going to be good because they're going to get down there in a lot of positions to be able to kick, but they won't be able to capitalize because the Broncos defense is freaking good. So I think that this is a good matchup for Justin Tucker as a fantasy kicker. Listen, you've got to take advantage of the CJ Stroud sweat-free projection. Tonight is the night that you've got to take advantage of it. It's 0.5 total yards for new customers only. You've got to get in on Underdog today to take advantage. So go down there in the comments, grab the link that's there, use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. They'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 bonus cash when you hit the higher on this sweat-free projection for CJ Stroud in this game versus the Jets tonight. Dropping down to our next tier, Brandon McManus of the Green Bay Packers versus the Detroit Lions. Brandon McManus is just in a great situation right now because Brandon McManus is on an offense that's really good, and all of a sudden we're seeing him average 9.5 fantasy points per game. First game with the Packers, 7 fantasy points. 12 fantasy points in the second game. Hasn't missed a kick yet. Brandon McManus is definitely in good position because I've been saying it all week. This is a matchup that you want fantasy options in. That goes to the kickers as well. That goes specifically to Green Bay's kicker because Detroit, they're ballsy and they go for it on 4th down a lot. So they don't always kick, but Brandon McManus is in a great position here versus the Detroit Lions. I love Brandon McManus because he's just in an offense that is always getting you down there. Now, obviously, if Malik Willis is the quarterback and not Jordan Love, it lowers his upside a little bit. He'll probably go down to the last tier rather than being at the top of tier 3. But just as we, continue to see the positive reports with Jordan Love, I'm assuming Love plays, and that's why Brandon McManus is at number 7. Will Lutz, Denver Broncos kicker at the Baltimore Ravens. Look, I just said it. I think this is going to be a much more competitive matchup than people think. I really believe that. I think that this matchup here is going to, listen, the Broncos offense has been much better over the past month of football. They've been moving the ball consistently. They've been scoring more points. And the Baltimore Ravens defense, their run defense is really good. Well, guess what? The Broncos don't run the ball that much, so they're going to throw. And Baltimore's pass defense sucks. They're horrible. They're absolutely awful. It's mind-blowing because they have personnel. Anyways, that's a different story. Will Lutz will be in position. He is going to be in position in this game. Denver's going to make this a competitive game. I'm telling you right now. And Will Lutz has obviously already been great in fantasy football. He's averaging just under 10 fantasy points, and he's really, really accurate. Only 1 missed kick this year and a 52-yard long. I love Will Lutz this week versus the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore this week. I think it's going to be a much more competitive game, and Will Lutz has a lot of opportunities. Rounding out the tier, Will Reichard, Minnesota Vikings kicker versus the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday night. Now with Will Reichard here, I think that this is a guy who is actually in a really good offense for a kicker. Like Will Reichard is a top 10 kicker right now. He's averaging 10.4 fantasy points per game. He hasn't missed a kick all year, and he's hit a 58-yard long. This guy has been a stud for the Minnesota Vikings here. The reason I am actually liking him more and more is because this Vikings offense, they're starting to show some cracks a little bit. They really, really are. And I do think that the Colts defense is not particularly strong. So I do think that this is going to be a week where Minnesota capitalizes on more touchdowns here rather than kicking more field goals. Because like the last couple weeks, the Rams defense is better than the Colts defense. They're getting better actively. So I think this is a better week for the Vikings offense as a whole, which is why roll rice yards down a little bit, because I think there's less field goals this week than there is extra points. Dropping down to our last tier, Cameron Dicker at number 10, at the Cleveland Browns, and Dustin Hopkins at number 11 in the same matchup. Cameron Dicker has been a pretty good player in fantasy football the past month. I mean, 10.6 fantasy points per game, and his last 4 games, 6 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, 21 fantasy points, and 9 fantasy points. He's been really good. I mean, Cam Dicker, obviously he's missed 3 kicks this year, but look at the difference between field goals and extra points. 18 field goal attempts, 11 extra points. This offense is good enough to get you down there because they've got Herbert, they've got a good run game, and they've got a wide receiver group that's evolving a little bit, specifically talking about Ladd McConkey. So this offense will get you down there a bunch, but in a matchup versus the Browns, who are definitely looking better defensively, I don't think that there's going to be a ton of scoring opportunities. It's a low over-under this week, which puts him kind of at this bottom tier, along with, like I said, Dustin Hopkins, who last year, if you were playing fantasy football, was a great kicker in fantasy football. He was excellent last year for a long stretch of time. Now he gets it again. I'm so happy for him because with Jameis Winston, he's got revived fantasy football upside. Last week with Jameis Winston, 12 fantasy points, 3 field goal attempts, and 2 extra point attempts. Jameis Winston opens up everything. Every fantasy option down to the freaking kicker. So Dustin Hopkins this week in a tough matchup versus the Chargers again. Low over under for a reason, but I do think is going to be in position this week way more than he ever was with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. And then to round it all out, Harrison Butker number 12 versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Kansas City on Monday night. Harrison Butker has just been okay, right? Like I've had better outlook on him ever since they lost Rashee Rice. And out of two out of the 3 games without Rashee Rice, he's done much better. 14 fantasy points in week 5, 4 in week 7 versus the 49ers, but then he had 10 again versus the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that this matchup against Tampa Bay, they won't have as much trouble, I don't think, capitalizing on touchdowns. Tampa Bay's defense is weak. They're a weak defense. So I think that this is a game where potentially he could get like 4 extra point attempts and maybe just 1 field goal. But if he gets 2 field goal attempts and like 3 extra point attempts, then we'll be looking at a higher ceiling guy. But I think his floor this week is a little bit lower because of the defense that the Bucs possess. So let me know how your lineup is looking so far this week. And if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for this week, click on this video right here.